Welcome to Morgan Latif Presents. I'm actually speaking to Puneet Jhawar today, who is the General Manager for the Global Spark Ignite business unit at Cummins. Puneet Jhawar has grown through the ranks at Cummins and has seen many different environments and different business units within the business, which has required him to have a strong leadership capability in multiple environments and also with a global perspective. And so we're digging into those experiences and actually, interestingly, learning a lot from the mistakes that he made and also how he adapted to those environments and what he learned from those challenges in order to become the leader that he is today. So hope you enjoy it and let's get into it. Great. So, Puneet, thank you so much. Great for deciding to help us with the podcast, and thank you so much for taking the time to do it. Really appreciate you being here, obviously. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Joel. Thank you for having me
I
on
mean,
this one, and then appreciate you taking the time to talk to me as well.
yeah, absolutely. We've obviously been in touch for a long time, and every conversation I have with you is really productive, but also slightly inspiring as well when it comes to leadership and in general just what goes on in the market. It's super interesting as well. And the theme of today obviously is leadership. But before we get into that, obviously I know you, but people on LinkedIn and so on maybe don't know you so well. So could you just give us a very quick rundown of a little bit about your background and kind of what you're doing at Cummins and so on?
Sure. Again, thanks for having me. I've most of my life has been spent on commercial roles and been with Cummins for about 15 years now, in different and varying roles, primarily on the business facing or on the customer facing. So I've now been leading teams for a fairly long time. So within the Cummins context, I lead the entire Spark Ignited group for Cummins, which includes the product lines of natural gas, propane, and octane globally. And then I've got a fairly global team that sits across in different various geographies as well. But within the Cummins organization, I've led some of the bigger accounts for them, and also led some other smaller businesses before kind of growing to a global role. Prior to Cummins and outside of Cummins, I've got exposure with companies like MAN Diesel and Turbo, which was based out of the UK and in the European market. And then certainly, of course, I have experience in Ingersoll Rand based out of India and some of the other geographical territories. So quite happy to be here. I am an MBA from University of Leeds, so pretty much close to somewhere where you are, Joe. And I
Yeah.
am a mechanical engineer by my first degree, which seems like a really long way now. So it's a pleasure to be here again. Thank you.
No, absolutely. And Leeds University, I mean, I'm sure there's many a great person that's come out of there. So anyone watching this from Leeds, you could definitely give us a like for plugging you for that. But yeah, obviously we want to talk about leadership, and it's such a fascinating topic, something that I always want to talk about, because it's really, the way that you're bringing up the future generation. It's the best way to get, the extra 10% out of your team. And everyone has a lot of different schools of thought of how to do this, right? And it's interesting. Obviously, Cummins is a very well-known business, and it's a company that is, I'm sure, got many good leaders in it. Even from my life, I've even noticed in my short career that there's certain people in my life that have helped shape the way that I lead and manage a team. So yeah, I mean, obviously, the podcast is about leadership. And yeah, one of the reasons you got on here because we wanted to see, about your leadership style, and also, there's people, even when I think about my own career, people in my life that I know have shaped the way that I lead people. But from your perspective, who most impacted your leadership style in your career and why?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, Joel. And I think I've been a little bit fortunate in the fact that I've had a very, very diverse experience, including that, like I said, I've worked in India, I've worked in the Middle East, I worked in Europe, I worked in the UK, worked in the US, worked in Japan a little bit. So
Mm,
I've had the opportunity to work with leaders which are from different geographies who've had a varying style, partially impacted by the countries that they've grown in, partially impacted by the cultures that they've
hmm
been worked in organizations. And so I think I've been fortunate to absorb a lot of those things from different people and then kind of morphosized into what I thought what became my leadership style. But I think my journey has been also molded in a way by a lot of feedback. And I would say a lot of constructive, positive feedback that I got from my peers, and then also from the teams that I've been leading. Because and I think it's a blessing that they felt that I should learn a few things, and they were kind of open, candid, and honest about things that worked for them and things that didn't work for them.
Mm.
And so I think it's hard to pinpoint saying that there's one leader. So it'll be unfair on some of the others if I was to call out names. And I think there's a lot that I am grateful to for this journey. But I'm
Mm.
also grateful in some way, shape, or form to the leaders who were not that great, because in a way they taught me what not to do. Because having worked for a person who kind of had a very different leadership style, or maybe I wasn't the right fit for that person, but I did learn things that really don't gel with how the employees like it. So I think it's been again, I think it's you can learn something or the other
Mm.
from each of the leaders. I would strongly recommend you take the good parts of it, and what you don't like, kind of figure out a
Mm.
way of doing things differently. So
Sure.
it's been a long journey, but it's been fruitful, and
Yeah.
it's very fulfilling.
Yeah, and I suppose I'm kind of digging deeper into that. I mean, you talk about learning off the leaders that maybe didn't do so well. I mean, from your perspective, it's always a journey in the spirit of continuous improvement. When you look at your career, what failures did you experience as a leader that you think most shaped you to be the kind of leader you are now?
Yeah, it's that that's an interesting question as well, because I think as somebody who has a longer career, you certainly are going to have failures, and I think the good thing about that is if you learn from those failures, dust off, and move on, it's a very rewarding journey at the end. I think for me the m- the most, and I'm going to maybe give a different spin on that question, if it's okay with you, is um, the way I looked at my journey was that the transition from being an executor or somebody who was the doer of the things,
Hmm.
and more like an individual contributor, and I would go meet a customer, close a sales deal, or go lead a smaller account, or whichever way it was. And then you transition from being the person who you were doing it to then being the person who's now leading a team. It was a very difficult urge for me to not roll up my sleeves and dive in and say, right, here's how you got to do it. And there are some team members who would appreciate that, but mostly broadly, people don't appreciate getting micromanaged.
Mm.
And then, so for me, that the transition on how do you from becoming a doer to becoming a leader, and what are the elements that kind of go along with that, I think it was a learning journey. But
Mm.
again, like I said, I was grateful to the teams that I had, because they were clear in articulating and helping understand what styles worked, what they liked, what they didn't like. And I think if you ever have a team like that which tells you things and gives you feedback, constructive feedback, positive or negative, I think you should think about it as a blessing. So for me, that one certainly was that. And then as I grew through that, um, how do you make sure that you take everybody along with you,
Mm.
and 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 start trusting the team and build that trust along the team, so that you can share a broader level of a strategy or a vision on where you're going to go. And I think it took me it was a learning journey, again, a curve for me as well. And I'm grateful to the coaches and mentors that I've had over the period of time that have helped me kind of live through that life. And then the third element for me is, which I think is often kind of overlooked, is that as organizations become broader and complex, leaders start looking at their own particular silos. And I
Mm.
think one of the strengths that I've had, and I'm grateful again to the people who've coached me on this one, is to look beyond where your work is and sphere of influences. How do you use and work around with peers, with colleagues, and with extended teams to be able to kind of get to where you want to be, and achieve the objectives, one for the business, for yourself, and for the others as well. So it's yeah, the leadership my leadership journey surely and clearly hasn't been without its failures, and I'm
Mm.
kind of grateful for those in a way, and but also grateful that there was somebody when I had a failure to help coach me, guide me, but continue to take a risk on me as well. So
Mm.
so I think those are the few things that I'd say about when you transition from being a doer to a leader,
Yeah.
be careful in mindset and cognizant of what are the things that you are doing and what you shouldn't be doing as a leader.
Yeah, I think it's the art of delegation, isn't it? You sort of have to learn, especially because I think good leaders are people that lead from the front, right? And they are people that are that know how to do the job, and obviously you'll have these sort of young up and comers that want to. They probably have a similar level of hunger and drive that to do the job just as good as you, but just through experience, they still haven't made those mistakes yet to get you to the level that you're at. And it's almost giving them the opportunity to fail so they can learn, so they can grow. And it's like you said just there about, you're grateful for the mentors that when you did fail, they were able to mold you and mentor you, and also, I suppose, be patient with you until you got there. And that's a huge part of leadership, what you were talking about there as well. But it is that delegation element as well. It's so hard to let someone go and do it, especially when you know they're not going to do it right.
Yeah, and it's easier said than done. It's very easy to read in a textbook and say that delegate. But I think it's the delegation with making sure that the person that when you delegate, the person is successfully doing it, making sure that you kind of quarterback them, and it's a very US term, I know, but kind of be with them and make sure that you've kind of got their back and supporting them in whatever they're trying to accomplish, and be that right coach and guide so that they can lean on you for advice and bounce of ideas or whatever else you want to do.
Exactly, and it's been that example setter as well. Someone was a mentor of mine actually when I first went into management earlier in my career, and I was like young. I was too young to be a manager, really, 22 years old. But he told me that your team will do 200% of what you do wrong and only 50% of what you do right. And he's kind of like, wow, but it is kind of that level. You're setting the example. Of everything you do, and then you want to pass that down, that knowledge. So definitely, I think it's a value to allow people to fail, but also help them grow from that as well. I mean, I suppose that's a nice transition into the question that kind of popped into my mind just there as well. Was you've got this sort of generation of young leaders. I'm sure you've got people in your team that you're sort of looking at to grow and within the company. And I suppose a good question is what advice would you give to aspiring leaders or even current leaders that are maybe in a growth mode? What advice would you give them looking ahead?
Um, it, I mean, one of the few things that I keep telling people is, when I go back to my example, that the reason I became a leader because somebody took a risk on me and thought that this was the right time for me to kind of transition towards that.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things that I keep telling people is that take risks. It's okay. It's okay to fail. It's okay to try and not be successful, but you'll learn something out of the way. But if you don't take risks, you'll never get there. Never know that. Um, the other thing that I keep telling people is that be a great coach, be a great mentor to people, because the experiences that have shaped you are not necessarily the same experiences that somebody else is going to get. So while you're coaching people and mentoring people, little do people realize that you're getting coached yourself as well in some way, shape, or form. So you're
Yeah.
learning from somebody always. So keep an open mind, keep learning, keep making sure that you're trying to kind of grow along with people. And then the other thing that I keep telling people is that don't forget to identify talent, because I think in quite a lot of things, some people get intimidated that if you've got a team member who's exceptionally talented, that don't be afraid of it. It's your job as a leader to make sure that that person gets the wings that he or she is supposed to, and then help promote those people in the team. And when I say promote, it doesn't necessarily meaning raise up the hierarchy of that person. Test the people, give them more work, give them more responsibility, give them a broader level of things that they exposure that they may or may not have in the job. Involve them in projects that are unique, different than their skill set might have. But so goes back to the same point again, Joel, is to say that take risks on people. Take risk. It's a beautiful thing to do it. It is hard to do it, but then if you take risks, have the courage to say that whether that experiment failed or became successful. If it becomes successful, it's extremely rewarding to see the person grow. If it's not, in the end of it, you learn something out of it as well, and it kind of plays the part in that leadership journey. So I think it's all about people in the end. It's kind of making sure that you've got to love people to be a great leader, and so don't be afraid to engage with people. Is the advice that I'll give them.
Yeah, I think that is so true. Kind of, you've, like you said, got to love people to be a leader. You do, because yes, you're a leader, and there's always going to be good times in the sense of seeing them grow and develop. But with that, you also comes like all the issues of leading people as well. People don't have perfect lives, so you've got to kind of be with them in the good times and the bad times, and there'll be times where they're struggling, and I'm sure there's times in your career where there was a mentor that's probably helped you to kind of grow in a situation where sometimes you probably didn't believe that you could do it, but because that's our goal, right? As a leader, you've got to stretch people as much as possible to help them grow. It's just like anything. It's like when you're trying to build a muscle, you've got to stretch it. You're going to make it work. And it's the same sort of concept. So yeah, 100%. I think that's is so interesting. And finally, I mean, obviously we're in an era where technology is just going crazy fast. And I just it blows my mind sometimes, like of what we're trying to achieve or what we're achieving just now, even as a world. And so what would you say is the most difficult part of being a leader in this sort of fast technology evolving era?
It's interesting because in the previous question you made a little bit of reference to that as well, because you said that people have good days and bad days, and I think with technology you've now got people sitting across the world. You've got people sitting across different places, or somebody's working from home, somebody's working remotely, somebody's working in the office, and so the lives have become a lot more intertwined with work in some way, shape, or form. I think that the leadership as a journey is trying to figure out people, trying to lead people. It's always had its challenges, and I think technology kind of brings in a new element, which some people have seen that, and we're still trying to figure out on where and what the right integration of technology with all of this is. I think a few challenges that I continue to see with technology, and I don't think I have a perfect answer for that, and I don't think anybody else does as well. But how do you continue to give people the flexibility that they want of working from different places? But then how do you integrate the teams together so that they're cohesive enough, and we are innovating enough, or we're kind of making the strides that you want to? It is a difficult one. It's a difficult one to balance, but it surely continues to pose a challenge. I think that some of the more complex things is that with the new generation, they've got a different thought process on how they want to use technology and how they want to be involved in it.
Mm-hmm.
I continue to work and see that how do you integrate new members who are going to come in the organization, and how do you make sure that they have, because organizations have a memory in some way, shape, or form. How do you make sure that people get integrated into the new organization, despite giving them the flexibility to say that you want to work from home, you want to work remotely? It is still organizations still have very people oriented again, right? So that's another challenge that I have. I think collaboration has become more interesting in the last few years. COVID certainly has put an accelerator to that one. We thought collaboration was only meant that if you kind of all got together at the same place, at the same location, at the same time. But now collaboration has a very different meaning, to say that you could potentially be in different places and in different time zones and in different times of working, and still be collaborative in terms of trying to do that. So I think, and then the final thing that I think that worries me the most about technology and the integration of technology with all of this leadership is the burnout. I think when traditionally when people came to the office, it was a very, you had a defined time of coming in, a defined time of going out, and you could mentally switch yourself off. And going even before that, when we didn't, all of us didn't have laptops, and all of us didn't have cell phones as well. So it was very easy to kind of start a day, switch off a work day, and then be very, very personable to the family. And then the laptop started creeping in, and now cell phones have creeped in, and now every single app that you use on your work um, desktop or laptop is pretty much replicated on the phone as well. So
Mm,
how do you kind of work with people, and how do you work with them to say that you've got to have a downtime, and
mm.
your mind is a really big muscle, and how do you make sure that you're kind of stopping yourself from working, and then you're spending time with family, friends, whatever else you do during the social times that you have. That for me is the biggest challenge that the technology poses, is that it's got so intertwined in our lives that even if you're trying to send a message to your friend, then you've got this urge to say, can I just open my email and see? Or,
Mm.
can I just send a Teams or a Zoom message to somebody, and that person will look at it when they look at it? I think in my mind, that's the biggest challenge. How do you solve that? Make sure that your teams continue to have the downtime, but then also continue to perform their best.
Yeah, I'm definitely guilty of that. Go to send a WhatsApp and then I'm in the WhatsApp rabbit hole of like sending messages to clients or candidates or just in general responding to. I think the problem is as well. You're right. It's so integrated in general with your personal life because your laptop, you could just be checking your own emails and then all of a sudden you're checking your work emails and before you know it, you're 2 hours down the line. um, but that's a real thing, burnout. Leadership. You don't think about. You think about how you say the collaboration element, which is crazy, and I think almost we are evolving our brains a little bit, even to this day, on how to do that, and how to collaborate remotely. But also there is a burnout element we have to be aware of as leaders, and you might get an extra 10-20% out of your team for a time being, but then that all might disappear when they all burn out, basically, and it's kind of keep tabs on that as well. I mean, what have you experienced this before, or is there something that you kind of are you're sort of aware? How do you set up a structure to kind of deal with that?
It's interesting because I hadn't realized that I did quite a lot of that myself, so I was guilty of it. But it was funny because I got again, like I said, I'm going to go back to something I said. I was very lucky that I had a really nice set of team that I've always worked for. I did a 360 on myself a while back, and the feedback that I got from the team was um, that I'll take on more and I'll continue to push myself and work odd hours. But then I turn around and I push my team to say that they've got to switch off.
Mm,
And so it was a very controversial message to what I was doing versus what I was asking my team to do. And I
mm,
think I kind of felt guilty of asking my team to work at odd hours, but I didn't feel guilty of myself doing it.
mm,
Which was, but I think I was extremely articulate about it, and I kept saying about it to say that I don't want you guys doing this because I was conscious that I did it. So and it's a continued effort to be careful about it. I think sometimes talking to the extended team and letting them know that this is your working style and they don't need to be under pressure to respond back, I think is often helpful. But
mm,
I think this for me is the most difficult element in the current situation, is to say that how do one protect myself from getting burnt out too much, guilty of sending emails at odd hours or things, and then how do you make sure that the expectation that you've got with the team is to say that they don't start feeling the pressure to say that, oh, some sent an email, the expectation to respond back in certain amount of time or not. So it's always a fine balance. It's always a delicate balance, and it's always, you've got to be conscious, and it's always got to be in your mind to be able to keep it at a point to say that when is excess is not excess, and
mm.
sometimes it's hard, to be honest.
Yeah. Have you noticed when you've been promoting that message, what have the results been from your team? Do you feel like that has improved their performance, or what have you sort of seen from that?
Yeah, I think it, again, it depends on individuals. I've seen some individuals who want to have flexibility to say that and want to respond at different hours, and then they do it and they still can work effectively. But then there are team members who have certainly felt the benefit of having a clearer understanding of how the expectations were, and taking downtime was okay. They took downtime and became more productive about it. So
Mm.
it's a very people dependent, it's a very individual dependent on what drives them, what kind of
Mm.
where their brain space is at, and it changes. It's
Mm.
a person doesn't remain the same way every day, every time. In a few months, the situation changes and the people change. And you've got to make sure that you're continuously aware of the changes that are happening across
Hmm.
people's lives.
Hmm.
That helps you become a better leader and a better integrator of the team.
Yeah, no, I think so, and I've definitely seen it even from my side. I mean, I'm fully remote, but I've seen, the team itself. When you do sort of, or when they feel like you care and sort of are kind of looking after their own interests as well. Obviously, the company performance and their performance as a team is important, but at the same time, as a byproduct, they do better because they know that you have their best interests in mind, but also they feel more inspired to actually give 100% effort, right? Every time. So, but no, listen, Puneet, this has been super fascinating, and I really appreciate your thoughts on all things leadership, so to speak. And there's definitely a lot of learnings from my side from this conversation. So thank you so much for coming onto the podcast, and yeah, appreciate your time.
Thank you, Joel. It's been a pleasure, and good luck to you and your teams. And I think you're a brilliant leader in that area as well.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Take care. Bye.